Thank you for coming. So, if you have recognized the resemblance of this front page with a train ticket, you are quite close up. Because it's a paradigm. Basically, I will talk about a journey that is still ongoing, that I started a bit more than 1 year ago when I joined Telenor Digital, and I started to apply promise theory principles to the way I lead the team. It's an ongoing experiment, so there are a lot of unanswered questions. You may get out of this room with more questions than those you have when you come in. The perspective of this experiment, the environment, is limited. It's the environment of an IT team that is working in a technology company. The scope is bigger because my assumption is that this principle can be applied to any organization at any level, not just at teams, small teams in a technology company. There will be quite tight on time, but I'll be around if you have questions. I'll try to leave some time at the end for questions. Wake up. All right. So, this leadership style I'm going to talk about is heavily dependent on how you are as a leader and the company, the culture that you have in the company. So I have to do one thing that I never do in any talk. I have to talk about me and about the company. I always assume that you are smart people. If you really want to know, you know where to look for information. But this time it sets the context of this experiment. So I have to talk a bit about that. And then we'll do a very short primer about promise theory, just a few concepts, but those that you need to understand. Then we put all together, and then we'll see what we have as of now, and how this can be expanded to bigger organizations than the one that I'm leading. So without further ado, me and Telenor Digital. Things that you need to know. I've worked as sysadmin in several organizations, and with my previous employer, I did a lot of configuration management using CFEngine. Why is this important? It is important because promise theory was invented by Mark Burgess when he was starting to write CFEngine version 3, and he needed a theoretical model that he could build the tool on. So you can think of CFEngine as a software application of promise theory. And having used this software long enough and at a good level, some principles of promise theory are just hardwired in my brain now. So I'm able to recognize certain patterns before other people can see them. So that's why this detail is important. And since we are talking about leadership, the most important experience in that respect are 13 months leading a 24/7 squad in Tiscali. For those that are Italian, they know the name. Otherwise, it's an ISP in Italy. And I've worked as a head of systems group in Sardinia IT, an agency of the regional government in Sardinia, for 5 months. Telenor Digital. Who is Telenor? Telenor is one of the biggest telephony operators in the Nordics and the biggest in Norway. And it's a telco. Who works for telcos here? Nobody. Wow. You can think about that as a luck. But yeah, telco environments are regarded as very traditional, very static, difficult to move fast. But Telenor Digital, that's a subsidiary, and it's different because it's a modern company using modern methodologies. And one thing that was very important for this experiment to actually exist is that we have freedom to experiment, and we are allowed to fail while we try to do new things. So it's not a capital sin. In many other companies, you know that you don't have that freedom. If you fail, it's a big problem. So that was key to trying out this thing. How was IT in Telenor Digital before I joined? Well, there was no dedicated IT team, and those that are normal, ordinarily IT tasks, tasks for an IT department, were scattered around many people. As a result, nobody had IT in its agenda as the main thing to do. A lot of technical debt started to accumulate to the point that someone said, well, maybe we need someone who does just IT here. So there we go with the one-man team initially. That was me. 1st of November. And that was challenging because there were a lot of day-to-day tasks and a lot of legacy, and I needed to understand where to put my hands first. Because as a one-man team, it was very difficult to, I couldn't tackle everything at a time. And there were a lot of different expectations. Think of technical teams, for example, the security team. They expected me to help with solving long-standing security problems. And non-technical people were waiting for their help desk. It's quite different expectations. It's two ends of the same range. And what happened was I was alone. I had a lot of people helping me, but no direct line of command to anyone. Anyone who was helping had other managers who set their agenda. So, problem. If you cannot apply a traditional leadership style where you have a line of command on people and you tell them what to do, what leadership style can you use? What works in that case? You have dozen people, but it's not that you can command. Well, what I can say is that you need to make that feature that makes traditional leadership break your advantage. So what kind of leadership style can work? Many possible answers. I can tell you mine. These are my 3 traits. The first one is the moment I'm appointed to lead a team, I start with trust and with supporting people. I don't start with a negative feeling. Then if this has to change, that depends on people and in the relationship that they are able to build with me and with the rest of the team. But the starting point is trust and support. The second needs an explanation. Don't be a jerk. Who doesn't know what jerk means? Front.
Yeah.
Sorry. So it's not the point that I cannot be a jerk. I can. Unfortunately, I can. But that's exactly the point. It's not that you need to prove that you can be one. Because even if you are Gandhi, you will find someone in your company that will piss you off to the point that that jerk that you have inside, very well hidden, there it is. So you don't need to prove that you can be. We know you can be a jerk. So try to do your best, the best when you work, and when it comes out, yeah, okay, natural. Right. The third thing is something that may, how many managers and team leaders we have here? Okay, at this next point, you may decide to leave the room, up to you. What does the third point mean? For some managers, it's important to use their authority just to prove that they are the boss. Right? You do this, there is no reason, but I'm the boss and you do what I say. Okay, if you are that kind of team leader, this talk is not for you. You can leave now. That was the context. Now, promise theory. I have to read just a little bit because the definition is important. I want to get this wrong. What is promise theory? It's a generic abstract theory to represent complex systems of any kind and their behavior, starting from the point of view of the system components and their interactions. Okay, so you have a complex system, you have many different pieces, and you don't start from the top down, you start from the components. That's important. If I say complex system, since a lot of you do development, that kind of thing, you may think of software. Right. Can be about software. Can be about computers on networks, can be about software talking across the network. But there are systems that are more complex than that. Usually they involve people. And the point of promise theory is that it can help you model any type of system when components are also people, not only machines, not only software, not only networks. Another important point about promise theory. You may not have heard of promise theory before, but you know what a promise is, right? Since the early age, promising will be good next year, otherwise Santa won't bring you toys, you know. So you know what promises are, you know what it means to keep them, not to keep them. It's an intuitive concept. You know what it means. And it's a powerful tool that you have, because even if you talk not about people talking and doing things, but about objects, you can abstract. You have an idea what it means for an object to keep a promise. We'll see that. So I'll touch these few points, and if you want to know more, if you are interested, you can take that book that is the simplest, not simple, but the simplest book about promise theory, written by the author of the theory himself. Key concepts. Of course, promise is one of the key concepts, and agent, the generic component. An agent is anything, absolutely anything, that can promise an outcome or a capability. It can make a promise explicitly or implicitly. Let's explain. This lady with the yellow shirt, she's been a world champion in running 10Ks. She held several world records in different distances. Now she's a personal trainer. And she has a good experience, as you can imagine. So she can, for example, promise to you, as a customer, she will help you to improve your time running 5 kilometers by 1 minute in 6 months. Okay, so she's talking or she's writing, and you make a contract of some sort, and she's making a promise to you, and you are using her promise. So that's quite an explicit thing. There is a contract. But you don't need people to make promises. This thing, it's not talking, it's not acting, it's not writing, but still it is promising me that it will output direct current, 19.5 volts, 3.34 amps, so I can charge my laptop. It's not talking, but it's making a promise. And the promise is written here, probably. This thing, a wristwatch. When you buy a wristwatch, it's because it makes at least one promise. But when you look at it, oh, time of day. Right. Then we can argue that these things now can make a lot more promises than we can list. But you have the idea. It's not talking, but it's making a promise implicitly. Is this clear? Good. Let's scale it up a bit. Super agents. This is a car, an old car, it's a car. And it's making a promise, very simple. It promises to enable you to drive from one place to another. Right? Simple promise. But this actually is not, if you look inside, there are a lot of small agents, all making promises, very different from what the car as a whole makes. The promise that, I don't know, the frame, for example, is making is quite different from the promise that the car makes as a whole. So what can we say about this mess? You have small agents all cooperating to keep a collective promise here. Promise is very different from the final one, but still cooperating and doing it voluntarily to keep a larger promise. In fact, the definition from Mark Burgess, again I have to read, super agent is just a collection of agents that form a collaborative role because of underlying promises working together. Why is this important? Because you are not interested in all these small promises. You are interested in more general promises, normally, unless you are a mechanic. So you can hide a lot of complexity by thinking of the promise of the super agent than thinking of the small promises that are underlying that. What considerations can we make? There are agents making promises and agents using promises. Notice that having only one kind of thing is a bit pointless. If that personal trainer made a promise to help you and nobody accepted her promise, she would be jobless. And if he wanted to improve his running time by 1 minute, but no personal trainer would take that challenge, he would be in trouble. So you need both things. Agents make promises voluntarily, and they try to keep them voluntarily. And they cooperate voluntarily to keep larger promises. Again, the card that we have seen before. And there may be boundaries where these promises actually hold. This thing can give me the power to charge my laptop if I plug it to a 220 volts, 50 hertz. If I plug it to 400 volts, it won't be able to keep the promise forever. Agents work voluntarily, so they may be unwilling to cooperate. You can try to incentivize them to cooperate. You can try to impose. May work, may not. Haha. The final step. This is the last slide about promise theory, the one that is coming. When a promise is made, you have to assess if the promise was kept or not. Who does that? Who decides if the promise was kept? Who has children here? Okay, teenager children? Yes, one has teenager children. Good. I question. If you ask one of your teenager children to clean up the room, who decides if the promise was kept? Them or you? Him. What does it mean to us? It means that assessing the promise is on the side of the agents using promises. If you have children, you tell them to clean up the room, you decide if the promise was kept. And for having good satisfaction on both sides, the end goal must be clear. You must agree on what it means to keep the promise. This could open a long discussion, and we don't have the time, but this is clear, right? You need to specify an end state, and that end state must be shared across who's making promises and who's using them. Let's put it all together. That was about time. Put it all together. Do you remember this diagram? We have seen it 10 minutes ago? Okay, so this poor man in the middle is me. looking at this diagram, it was quite quick to me to think about this in terms of promise theory. It was very, very quick, the connection, because all these people helping me, they were agents. Each one promising me something to help me. And I, as an agent, was using their promises. Am I right? Promising me to help in different ways, and I was using the promise. Not only I was using their promises, I was a super agent. Because using this network of promises and those agents, I was making promises to other parts of the company as the IT department. This is what I can do for you, this is what I can't do for you. And if needed, I could discover this network of promises, but it's not really important now. Okay, why should I worry about this? Why is it useful to do this effort, to model this with promise theory? Well, at least two things. First, a dozen people is helping me, and they are doing it voluntarily because they have their bosses setting their agendas. The worst thing I can do is to try to impose on them. Because then they will feel pressure, they will not be really so keen on helping me anymore. Rather, if I ask them what they can do for me, and in how long, how much it takes to, how long it takes to them, then it's a different thing. In fact, they are still helping, a lot of them are still helping, after more than 1 year. The second thing is, once I know what others can do for me, I also know what I can promise, more or less sure. What can be a stretch, maybe I can do this in this time, maybe I can't, and what I cannot do at all, because there is no one promising me and I'm not able to deliver myself. So this creates a nice situation when I'm able to set realistic expectations, and where I can decide what, in this huge pile of things to do, what I can pick. Because I can pick things as long as I have someone helping me. So this is the absolute minimum, but you can do a step more, still using promise theory. You can use promise theory to model processes. We have to have processes in company to make things go quickly, right? You can use promise-based leadership with direct reports, even if you could impose in theory, because it's not written anywhere that if you impose on other people, you get more guarantees that things that you want will be done. And since you have a model, you can also understand better what, for example, management in a company should do to improve the company, to make their management better. Time for some examples. How do you use promise theory to establish processes? So normally what happens, at least it happened in the company I work for, a group has certain needs, so they design processes that help them to deliver better, and then they try to impose these processes to others. But it doesn't really work, because people outside that group have to bend to fit in the picture that those who designed the process have made. It doesn't really work, because everyone optimizes for his, in their own team. It doesn't mean that it's optimal for everyone else that is affected by the process. So how does promise theory help you to improve this? Instead of designing processes just looking at your team, look at what those that are impacted by the process can promise. I have a concrete example, but it would take a bit long.
How much longer?
I can try to compress in a few minutes, but yeah, I have 12 minutes more.
15 minutes or 20 minutes, you can do that.
For them, well, they may have to go to other talks.
Okay.
So. But anyway, the idea is you think of what process is needed, what you're trying to do, what's your end goal, and you understand how people can help you with that, and to a point that you can also execute on that, and then you decide the process. You design the process that way. We used it, for example, to define the communication of our team to the rest of the company, because my colleagues are very opinionated in how communication should be done, and they have very different opinions. Or we used it to make a better offboarding process, because you may know that when an employee leaves, it's quite important to close all access on the different systems, and that was a bit of a mess. And again, we designed the process using promise theory. If you design processes in this way, you don't have to rely so much on imposition, because you are designing things in a way that people can actually do that, including yourself. You don't need a lot of police to ensure that, yes, you have to do this, otherwise you are in big trouble. You don't need much of that, because it's something, again, that people can do, and it's effective. I can tell you that it works. Then if we have enough time when I finish these examples, I can describe the practical example. But yeah, I can say that it works, but after just 1 year, I don't know if it is sustainable. We'll have to see. I think it is, but it's an open question. Wake up. Who knows what OKR is? One down there, and that's all. Okay, so OKR is 2. Okay, thank you. I don't know, look on Twitter while I try to explain some OKR in 60 seconds. Okay, in 60 seconds, then if you want to know more about OKR, watch this video. These slides will be available, so watch that video. Is from Google, and it's very interesting. So basically, OKR is a methodology that using which you take an objective, for example, coming from the top of the company, and you fraction this objective. Think of the CEO that makes an objective for the company, then the CEO has some senior vice presidents for finance, for HR, for whatever, and each one of these divisions see what it means, what is their contribution to succeed with that objective. So they will have other objectives. And you keep going down and fractioning these big objectives into smaller objectives until the single people, each one of them has their objectives. And attached to each objective, there are key results. So results that are measurable, that you attach to the objectives to understand if the objective was reached or not, or how much it was reached. That is really in 60-second OKR. If you need to know more, I really suggest to watch that video. As you can see, this is a completely top-down process. On the top, a big objective is decided, and then it fractions down to the leaves. The problem with a completely top-down process is that it doesn't have a reality check. The CEO can decide that you must have 1 million more users in 3 years, and it is completely out of this world. But yeah, that's the objective. And no matter how much you fraction it, it's unreachable. So how can you improve OKR? Under certain conditions, you can do this way. Start from the CEO here, for example, and his senior vice presidents. The CEO comes out with this great idea, this big objective. These men here should know what this team can do and can't do, at least have a reasonable idea of what they can do. Yeah, I see your smiles. I know. That's the problem. But if they have an idea, And if they can say no up the level, then they can understand that they can define an objective that is maybe challenging but doable. Once this is done, the process still goes down to the different levels until it reaches the leaves, most of us. And at that point, we should be able to discuss and then finally return a promise. So the process ends when you can have a straight line of promises from the bottom up. Problem number one, you can think that this doesn't work because there are too many loops. It takes too long. If you want to minimize those loops, you need managers to be managers. You need managers to know about their teams. They must know what their team does. And from your phrases, I can tell that it's not a common feature, right? Yes, someone even face palms.
You are suggesting that they should be able to do their job.
Precisely. Isn't that
amazing?
Science fiction? And the second thing is a cultural shift. If all you can do at the lower level is to say, yes, this cannot work. The culture of the company must allow you to negotiate, to say no, to discuss what is actually better, what is actually doable. Can it work? How many of you have used IDI6? 1, 2. Do you recognize 3? Do you recognize a pattern here? He does. Okay. There is an implementation. Okay, it's just machines, and machines are not as complicated as people. True. I'm with you. But this is exactly the same process for machines. Host A at this end promises that it can send packets up to 6455. And then it tries to send to the second level, to the router. The router will say, sorry, I cannot take that because I cannot move it forward, but can you do 3820? Okay, I can make that promise. Down 3820, oops, another router, and then it goes to the end. If everyone in the chain knows what promises it can make, and it accepts to make promises that are a bit smaller than those that would be otherwise making, then this works very fast. It's not that IPv6 converges in 10 minutes. Right? So this theoretically can work. But it requires managers to be managers and managers not to be jerk. And accept negotiation, accept confrontation. Trouble. Questions? I have more to say, but questions? So I can.
So you told us that you have been trying this for 1 year with
Yes.
your team, and for the next year, the team will enlarge. What are you going to to try the next
He's a
future?
funny guy. He's a funny guy. No, it's not going to enlarge. It's going to shrink. The number of helpers is going to shrink.
Okay.
So we'll have to shrink our promises too. 2 minutes. So I can do two things now. One is to talk about the practical part of this, so explain that process, how we design a process, or I have some pre-made questions that I can answer quickly. I'll count to 3. I want an.
One thing, just one simple thing. Can you cite an example, real life example?
Real life example?
Can you cite a real life example of when it's for sure, 100% sure that you cannot apply the promise theory?
So an example,
would say, no, no way, I cannot make it.
these are the examples that I could make. This one is from experience, and this one is using promise theory to project, to make an extrapolation.
Okay, one case.
One case, I could describe this again. There are some other examples that I made at Configuration Management Camp 1 month ago. I didn't make them because otherwise you would say this is Scrum. And the problem is, it looked like Scrum because it was examples from my IT team. And an IT team in a technology company, what you get using promise theory is quite close to Scrum. So I didn't want to make that example. But you can look at those. So I can use those questions. Did I invent this? Based on the meaning of the verb to invent, inventare in Italian, I probably did because I built this without any external input. But later I discovered there are articles about this since 2007. This is the oldest one that I could find. So someone is talking about this application of promise theory. I didn't know before I started. There is even someone coaching about promise-based leadership. Wow. Can it work on larger scale? I think it does. Again, I don't have data. I think it does. If you have the right context. Subset of Scrum? No. If you look at the very limited scope, it looks like Scrum. But this is larger in scope. So, summing up, because this is saying 0, 0, 0, so I'm at the end. Promise-based leadership style helps you to build better relationships in a team, to set more realistic goals, and to set the right expectations for people using your team's promises. Where can it work? Leadership style based on promises must rely at the minimum on position and instead empower team members and help them to develop so that they can promise more, so that they have more capabilities. And it requires a company culture where you can negotiate and where it's okay to say no. If you don't have this, probably doesn't work. Thank you.